Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Lucia Garay speaking. And if we could go to the next slide. Heather, let me do a little bit of an introduction about what we're going to be presenting today. We're presenting our set of CalECSE resources on interagency collaboration. I placed the link on the chat for the presentation today, which I recommend you download because you will need to access many of the links. Everything that we are showing today will be linked, and the actual link is on the first bullet of this slide. The remainder of the other 4 resources that we have on this slide are other resources in addition to the one that we are presenting this morning. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And let me show you what we have is we developed a 4-page flowchart with links for resources that you might need on developing and maintaining an interagency collaborative. The first section is the first 2 pages, and it is very specific to developing and maintaining interagency collaboratives. It's really a roadmap developed in a yes-no format, and very specifically, page 1 includes critical information and resources to assist you in aligning your local practices and to the regulations and requirements, with really a focus on the LEA and the regional center, resulting in collaboration that seamlessly supports families during the transition process. While page 2 is really about how to collaborate and more about that relationship between the 2 agencies, in forming a collaborative that will endure past the goodwill of current leadership. Then we'll go to the next slide, Heather. Section B is pages 3 and 4, and these are specific to how to conduct a review of your existing documents and signed agreements, as well as protocols that your individual agencies have in place, how to evaluate the efficacy and the sustainability towards a goal of really supporting effective transitions for children and their families from Part C to Part B. This section is structured more as a checklist for ease of reference by the interagency team, including resources to help maintain and develop cyclic revisits of the collaborative processes, practices, and documents. So as we present the resources today, please keep in mind that although it may seem like there's a linear process, each of the regions is at a very different place in our interagency collaboration transition practices. So we want to make sure to present all of the resources so that you know how to find them when you determine how to utilize them locally. And I will hand over the presentation to Sarah for part 1.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go over part 1. So like Lucia said, we have these flow charts and links for you. She just showed you the whole thing in a snapshot. We're just going to kind of dissect it a little bit piece by piece. So really, first part in starting is knowing, do you have an interagency agreement? And do you know where to find it? We have found throughout many presentations that because there is so much staff turnover at LEAs and regional centers, people may not know what it is, if it exists, or where to find it. So this slide really starts asking those beginning questions of where to get started, how to ask, and how to find it. Next slide, please. So again, once you identify whether you have an agreement or not, then it then takes you into looking at who from each lead agency should be involved as a decision maker. So for example, in San Diego County, I am the regional center lead, and then we work with our LEA partners. And on every slide, you will have the linked resources like Lucia mentioned. Next slide, please. So really the resources needed to identify and requirements for interagency agreement. This is a long list of basic questions, but it really helps you outline the responsibilities of each LEA and regional center, the processes for coordinating, the procedures for the assignments of service coordinators. This is really important, especially when we're trying to identify who is referring to whom. Who is responsible for the IFSP. So again, going piece by piece from the regional center side and the LE side to identify what are the requirements, and then making plans to review, revise, and develop your agreement regularly. In San Diego County, we meet as Part C agency leaders quarterly, and we review this at least annually. Next slide, please, Heather. Again, reviewing the transition requirements. We all know how important transition is, and timelines are so crucial. So reviewing the requirements is really important to establish who is responsible for which piece, both on the LEA side and the regional center side. So looking at, do you have cross-agency collaborations? Do you have designated meeting agenda items? And if not, you can schedule trainings for your staff members. And again, linked on the right-hand side are all kinds of documents related to transition rules, required timelines, school breaks, etc. So all the important pieces to make sure that we're successfully transitioning from Part C to B. Next slide, please. Here is a page of all the links. Particularly important to think about things we hear often are, what are your rules for late referrals? How have you decided to handle those? And also referrals during summer breaks. Again, we all have our timelines from our separate entities, and typically where we run into issues is knowing what to do and what is the plan for summer breaks. As we know, schools are closed, but regional centers are still operating daily. And also, what is your plan for late referrals so that those don't get missed? So again, here's the link to all the resources. Next page, please. So resources and rules for late referrals and transition timelines. Again, these are good documents to sit down and go through as a team to discuss those important requirements. Regional Center has our specific timelines and procedures, and Part C also has their specific timelines and procedures. So really important for both sides to understand each other's laws, rules, and regulations, and how to address the concerns appropriately or timely, or even celebrate the successes of what's working to make sure that all of our little ones are getting transitioned timely. Next slide, please. Again, referrals during school and summer breaks is usually the most common issue that we hear of. So again, making sure you're having that communication. On the my right side is the Early Start Coordinators Transition Checklist, also a really good tool for regional centers to use. We've also included some sample notification referrals to local school districts. So most agencies have their own, but if not, this is just a template that captures the basic information that's required by DDS, Department of Developmental Services. So all these things are suggested if you don't have them, but if you do already have them and they meet the requirements, then that's okay too. Sample notice of transition conference and resources for 10 best practices. Also helpful. Again, you may already have your own sample notification, otherwise commonly known as your meeting notice. and then the 10 best practices of successful collaboratives. Again, really important to know who all the players are, how to successfully work together when things are going well, or if there's concerns, and kind of keeping all of the stakeholders on track and making sure that you reconvene and review all these practices regularly. Again, we've included some more resources noting the differences between Part C and Part B. Like I mentioned, Part C and B have different requirements. So really important to know which category you fall under. And knowing each other's processes, you can use these tools as reference. So you're really understanding each other's roles and responsibilities. And this is really helpful when there are potentially disagreements, late referrals, a reference to go back to clearly identify where to fix the issue so that you're not falling into the role of the blame game. But again, really clearly understanding and clarifying each other's roles and responsibilities. Again, all of these resources are in the chat and are linked throughout the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Heather, I believe is next.
Actually, I'm presenting next again, and then I'll hand it back to Heather.
Back on. Thank you.
So this is the bottom of the yes/no questions on page 1 of our chart. And really what Sarah just covered and showed you were like all of the resources that are basic information to anybody who is new to a role in the transition process, either at an LEA or at a regional center. As a leadership team presenting to you today, we are regional center and LEA working together, as Sarah said, from San Diego County. And really the first place to go to if you don't know exactly the ins and outs of the transition process, it would be everything in page 1. I am now going to be moving into the elements for page 2. So as leaders in part C to B focused on transitions, sometimes we may skip over the development of a strong collaborative in favor of addressing the ever-pressing mechanics of the requirements, the timeline, the paperwork, and just balancing the caseloads of referrals and assessment processes across the agencies and all of the little blips and issues that we have across the agencies for communication. So if your region has reasonably functional practices, it is still worth revisiting this section to strengthen them. If you are coming up with a lot of issues around transition, timelines, communications, or having a smooth process for families, I also recommend that you really do look at this section. What is very important in this collaboration is that we know and we identify who our partner leader is from the regional center and the LEA. In San Diego County, we have several LEAs with one regional center, but that is not the same arrangement across counties. So Heather will give you some examples later on in the presentation today about different counties and different agreements. But I just wanted to make sure and let you know that before you look at collaboration, you need to have that contact and that agreement across the leaders in the agencies in your region, whether it's one or a handful, hopefully not more than that, to really work on the collaboration and make it sustainable across time. So what we have in this first section is if you've determined who those cross-agency leaders are, you can determine like your readiness for collaboration or for change. This is a sampling of 3 very simple scales for collaboration. One of them is the teamness. How together are your teams individually and collaboratively? The other one is for communication. It could be internal or cross-agency. And then the rating scale to assess team problem solving and creativity. Again, you as leaders can decide if you want to do this separately and be reflective internally so that you get to know your team first, and then share the results with each other if you want to launch it across the staff at both agencies, and if you want to set it up electronically so that you can disaggregate the data based on responder roles. Again, it is just a resource. It is a very good opener to also allow you to work with your teams in having everybody be on board, that they are part of the voice of visiting and assessing the collaborative. Next slide, Heather. So if you already have a collaborative, you need to ask yourself, next slide, Heather. There we go. Thank you. So if you already have a collaborative, you need to reflect with your partner leader in the other agency as to whether you have written norms, agreements for how to make decisions and having consensus, establishing meeting frequency and duration, and protocols and responsibility for facilitating, documenting, and communicating across the agency. This is a very simple list, but in reality, it's a very complex process. And so for this, we are giving you a resource that's called the 5 Steps to Organize a Collaboration. And the link is on this page. I will follow with some screenshots and just give you a very brief outline of what were included. Thank you, Heather. So each of these 5 steps has individual steps within, right? And the 5 steps could be at very different levels to where you are as a collaborative. So these 5 steps are going to guide you in having organized and sequential conversations on number 1, how to deciding why to collaborate. Regional centers, and we've presented at different times, regional centers and LEAs have different sets of data requirements. And there may need to be a conversation about why the collaboration is important beyond the written signed agreement. So we're talking about paperwork and having a written agreement versus really having collaborative practices that are focused on the family. The second point to really discuss in organizing your collaboration is recruiting and convening your stakeholders. And that has various steps. In San Diego County, when we convened the stakeholders, we made sure we did not keep it at the SELPA levels because we had one regional center, but several SELPAs. We included leaders from both Part C and Part B within individual school districts. And we also included our Exceptional Family Resource Center leadership. So again, you really do need to have an intentional conversation for recruiting and convening your stakeholders. Once you're there, there needs to be a work into really defining the vision and the desired outcomes specific to the collaboration in Part C to B transitions. And there's very specific steps. That's the third resource on this slide. Moving on to the next slide, we have the establishing policies to guide the continued collaboration. And again, it's very important that when we set ourselves up to really looking and working on the collaboration, that we follow it through and that we revisit it periodically. So again, monitoring the success is the 5th step to organizing a collaboration. Again, these 5 steps could be taken individually or sequentially based on where you are in your local efforts. Now, all of us have been involved in developing vision and mission and actions within our organizations. So this section of resources that we are presenting is not really to take the place of any other experience that you might have had, but it's just to focus and to give you resources at your fingertips, very specifically applicable to this interagency agreement and collaboration. So it's really developing a vision across two very separate government entities that are reporting separate requirements to different entities, yet we are both required to work very closely and smoothly for families. So moving on to the next step, again, don't move to the next slide. Sorry, Heather. I just wanted to go over this. This next step really is about defining the collaboration. We may have a very well-functioning transition process in our county, but it could be cooperative, it could be a coordination, or it could really be a collaboration. So go on to the next slide now, Heather. Thank you. So this is just a very simple at-a-glance chart that really offers you as leaders an opportunity to kind of look at it at a current level of work, and based on that base, focus improvement. If you say, no, we're working really well, and we're at the cooperation level for these 2 or 3 factors, but we're doing really good, we're moving towards coordination in this other one, where do we want to focus next? Again, a different type of resource to give you a roadmap on how to work collaboratively with other leaders in your area. Next slide, please, Heather. So how do we evaluate the collaborative success and our continuous growth without focusing on the negative? Most of us will just kind of keep doing our work until something comes up, and it's usually a negative experience between staff working cross agencies, or a negative experience for a family. So here we really do want to focus on asset-based assessment of our collaborative practices in each region. Both of the links are here. So let me move on to the very next slide, which is the best practices for successful collaboratives. And Sarah hinted and presented to this in one of those initial slides, but this is really a very nice description of those 10 best practices in layman's terms that can also be shared with your staff. You could provide staff development on these pieces, and we really do recommend and have seen that whenever we're able to manage the logistics, having joint staff training and staff experiences centered on a document, so that there is no centric on the you do, we do, but just a document that's positively focused on advancing the collaborative practices, really does work. If you and your partner leader from the other agency wish to collaboratively determine where to start in building your collaborative, you may just complete this assessment between the two of you and use it as a tool as leaderships to continually guide and improve your processes. Then we really do need to make sure we formalize our collaboratives. Our experience had been that the collaborative was really guided by the relationship of the leaders and the passion that the leaders might or might not have to being collaborative versus being individually compliant with their agency's requirements. So at the end of page 2, what we are providing is a set of templates that you may use to develop agendas and other base documents for your collaborative. Now, as leaders, you have experience going through this process before, no doubt, as I've mentioned. However, we also know that having these simple resources at your fingertips with examples on how these principles apply specifically to interagency Part C to B transition collaborations across agencies would be useful for you to reference. So in addition to the links on this slide, the following two slides, and go ahead, Heather, as I speak through the 5 resources. Process agenda, meeting template, a visioning activity for your collaborative, and then on the next page, sample ground rules for collaboratives, and it's really a 2-page document. So feel free to edit these locally, personalize them as you need them locally. These are starting points that we offer for ease of getting into this very difficult work that for which we have to really reserve time to do and to build a lasting collaborative within everything else that we are doing. And now I'm going to hand it over to Heather, who will present the section on reviewing the local interagency agreements, the ones that we are required to have in place and review annually. Go ahead, Heather.
Sure. Thank you, Lucia. As we're going through this process, it may feel a little bit overwhelming. And, we keep speaking to our model in San Diego, and I will tell you, we've lived through these experiences of trying to collaborate and going back to some of those foundational practices have really been helpful to us. We had to review our interagency agreement several years ago in San Diego County, and that was really a unifying time. So sometimes when you have to do agreements, they can cause discussion or disagreements. It really helped us see each other's perspectives and also to deepen our collaboration because it was meaningful work that was really based on helping all of our families that we serve. So we already had a practice in San Diego to meet regularly throughout the year. And so we had to schedule additional meetings to specifically work on the interagency agreement. And we made sure to have balanced perspectives from both agencies. We do keep our interagency agreement as an agenda item at least annually to review. So every December, we know at our December meeting, we're going to review the interagency agreement and see if there's any areas that need clarification. So scheduling those meetings. Then on the next step on the flow chart on page 3, you're going to conduct that formal review and do all of look through all these processes and documents to help you understand the process and make sure you understand that collaboration. For us, we had a big shift. We changed the format, so we had to agree on the format. We had to agree on who was going to be on this committee. We had to agree on who was going to take charge. So we tried to work in teams. So it wasn't, well, the LEAs want this and the regional centers want this. We really tried to have those deep, hard discussions through this process. And at the end of the day, I think everyone in the room was committed to making sure it was a smooth process for our children and families. And we also had our Family Empowerment Center, which locally in San Diego, that's Exceptional Family Resource Center, or EFRC. We had them at the table to help keep us grounded in our families. So they really work locally with our families, and it was important to us to have them. And to the point where even though they're not a required signatory, we even documented in our interagency agreement and had them sign that they were a part of that process so we could ground ourselves in that family collaboration as well. There are many resources outside of the ones that we've provided that are linked on CalECSE's website. There are resources from OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education Programs, and different things that we have linked throughout this document. Some of the resources from the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, you have some resources on the transition FAQs. Part of your interagency agreement is really looking not only at the services in Part C, but a key component is that C to B transition. And we were really struggling at that point. They weren't always timely, and districts were feeling that pinch of time. So having good, solid sources of information for both of us to digest and understand is really valuable. If we can continue through the flow chart, we're on section A, page 2. And this is really reviewing that alignment between practices and agreements. So are we agreeing to what we're going to do? And are we actually doing what we say we're going to do? So looking for that alignment, and there are some tools here to get feedback from your providers, from your families, from your administrators on how is that process going. In addition to this work informally, for example, in East County SELPA or Special Education Local Plan area, I try to schedule my early start provider meetings after our countywide collaborative meetings. So then I take information there, hear what's going on, our concerns, bring it back to my local providers so that we have that constant feedback loop. So having the voices of all that are a part of this transition process is really important. So another tool that we have shared with you is adapted, I believe, from INTEC, which is the National Association or National Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. And they really have some great tools on how to design those effective early childhood transitions. That's where many of us struggle on that indicator 12, which will be another training we're doing shortly. And really looking at who's involved with this process, what are the key steps in this process and helping you locally. In our area, in addition to all the work we do with our Part C programs and providers, we also did county-wide meetings with Part C to B and leaders. And Lucia referred to that earlier. We all got in the same room. It was a big room, but we had all of the people, you know, learning from their experiences and could talk across districts and across agencies to make sure that we were working towards the right thing. So here's a tool that you can use in your area to evaluate your infrastructure. And part of that early childhood transition self-assessment these are the different components of that transition. And as different agencies, really reflecting on where you are and what practices you need and what would work in your area. So this is a starting point, but you may also find you might need to self-reflect. For example, in our area, our transition packets were very slow and we really were struggling. We had a lot of students that we weren't even invited to the transition planning conference. And then all of a sudden we got a referral like 3 weeks before their 3rd birthday. We're not talking late referrals to Part C. We're talking they had been in Part C that whole time. So really we had to talk with our regional center. They've done a really nice job listening and developing practices to meet those needs. And then they started sending out letters like really, really far in advance. So it was triggering our timeline. So we had to talk to them and say, hey, when you send us this really, really early referral, thank you. However, now we are having that 15-day for the assessment plan to be considered by the parent, and then our 60-day timeline, and the kid is 2-9. So we've had to kind of talk through some of those along the way. And this is a great tool to help you guys go with your partners and look through. So continuing through the flow chart, you're going to conduct an assessment of your regional center interagency agreement. You might want to have a small group. We didn't have everybody that was on our collaborative participate, but we did have other people who joined us. So think through who you want to have in that process to self-audit. And we've included checklists for you to use. And also, if you need local data sharing agreements, we have selected a link for you and I've given you an example as well. So making sure as you're collecting all this information, which seems like a lot of work, that flow chart could be very overwhelming, but just take it a piece at a time and feel where are the greatest needs in your area. You don't have to do everything all one year, but take what's most important to you this year and maybe tackle one section of that. Okay. On our next slide, we have those checklists for reviewing your transition documents. We have some people that are really good at looking at interagency agreements and looking at that language. They were key people to have them go through the documents and look through. So looking through those different pieces of your interagency agreement and looking for the required components. We also have all of the mandatory elements of your written agreement and your best practices. So things that aren't required, but are really good practices for you to have. Going back to the flow chart, we're in section B on page 3, and we're at steps 6 and 7. So as you're working together, you want to jointly identify the agreed upon items to be included in your revised interagency agreement. If there's things that are agreed upon but not required, really think in your area what's best. Is there potentially an area for a policy procedure so that if things change, that you don't have to update your interagency agreement to do anything differently? So really be mindful of what you're putting in your interagency agreement, because that has a whole process for approvals. And you want to make sure that you're not putting something in there that might be a little more subject to change. We also had to think about the signatories and the timing so that we were all getting approval within the same window of time. We have a very large LEA that sometimes interagency agreements don't always get on their agenda, and it took us almost, 8, 9, 10 months to get it on the agenda for that district to consider it. And so it was holding up the whole rest of the process. So really, we had to talk through those things. Like, when is it going to your agenda? Okay, then we'll plan out for the other approvers to what that timeline looks like. Because we can't have our, different parties operating on different agreements in that interim period. Making sure that you have a dispute resolution process outlined in your interagency agreement is critical. And you really want to have a thought process of what does that look like at the provider level? Is it a service coordinator and a provider that are having a difference of opinion? Is it the LEA and the regional center? Or is it a bigger conflict? So you really need to think through how you're going to handle those things, because the best time to decide that is when there's no dispute. When you're trying to figure it out in the middle of a dispute, things get a little more hectic. So back to the flow chart, section B, page 4 now, we're on step 8. So you can review some sample templates of different interagency agreements from other parts of the state. That was something we started with. We had our practice, and I know like Dylan Henry and those in Orange County, we really liked the layout that they had. It was very clean and simple. So that was even a first agreement we had to have. Like, what is this going to look like? So if you collect different examples, you can find things that will or will not work in your region and take the pieces that work best for you. So think about those things, even though it seems silly on the format. Those are important things to think through when you're doing that. The other thing, we wanted to make sure our document was accessible for our staff, and making sure that it was user-friendly and plain language, that anybody had the same interpretation reading it. So that took a lot of time. Once we were done and we thought we had a great product, we did region-wide, we co-trained. So we had an LEA representative and a regional center trainer. And then our audience was our service coordinators from regional center and our coordinators and providers from the LEAs. So we co-trained, and we all calibrated our training across, because, every time you do a training, it's different. And we had different trainers in each part of the county. And it was really important to us to have that. So after we all did the trainings, after every training, we met. Okay, what questions did you have? Is there anything that means we need to go back and clarify it in our interagency agreement? These are our answers. We all agreed on the answers to the questions that came up. So as we continued doing trainings, we all had a common messaging. So that was a lot of extra meetings, but it really helped us make sure we were clear in what we all understood and took away from that interagency agreement. So think about things like that as you're going forward. We have through our exemplar lead through CalECSE, we have collected a variety of samples of interagency agreements across the state for you to use as you see fit in your area. Jumping back to the flow chart. Going back to conducting an assessment of the interagency agreement and then steps 9 and 10. So as you are going through, you're monitoring and evaluating that interagency agreement after it's finalized and making sure that, or excuse me, as you're finalizing it, who's drafting it, who's typing, who's editing, what are our agreements for those timelines? So we had some folks that were really good at proofreading and making sure things made sense, even in other people in the other agencies' areas. We decided who was going to be in charge and hold the master copy for all of the edits. So all of those things were things that we had to think about, and all those tiny details to help this process go smoothly. And again, you just repeat it for any process. This whole process is really good for all of your different reviews and activities and agreements. So on our flow chart, the step 11 of the conducting the assessment of the interagency agreement, again, having that final review and making sure that all of that interagency communication and collaboration is addressed in the process so that you can have all of those things in place, because it's just a pain. If you go through all this work, you get your interagency agreement finalized, and then you're like, oops, I think we missed something. So save yourself up front by doing some of these successful collaborations. So as you're going through that process, thinking how you're communicating out to others. So thinking about, for us, we have had a lot of turnover in our early start environments. Forever, we had like the same 10 people as service providers and at regional centers and the administrators. And then we started feeling this little bit of a undercurrent of a turnover. And so really thinking through, like, what does that mean? How, despite this, how can we make sure our interagency agreement is still functioning, our collaborative still functioning? And then like down at the LEA level, how are those referrals still happening? So in our area, we've had some generic intake emails created because, this person retired or this person went to a new job, and then regional center was used to contacting Heather, but Heather now is here. So referrals were getting delayed. So thinking through some of that communication of having more generic emails that then the LEA can assign whoever's in that role, and then the other party doesn't have to continuously, wait, is it Heather? Is it Lucia? Who am I contacting? So think through those things. The regional centers meet with districts. We don't meet individually. We have regular meetings, all of my Part C provider meetings. Regional center and our Family Empowerment Center are invited to all of those meetings. We usually have Sarah, who's our countywide Part C, and the unit managers that serve my area. They attend, so we can talk provider to provider and hear from each other on a regular basis throughout the year. In addition to our countywide meetings, we have local meetings within our SELPAs. Maintaining those open communications to ask questions, to understand when staff changes. How can we do that? We frequently have joint trainings by regional center on our transition referral system. So we have all of those pieces, and allowing that joint training. If there's a topic that's both good for any Part C providers, how can you invite your regional center partners and or your LEA partners to be all on the same page? We've talked a lot internally about how to help parents as they are leaving Part C and completing those registrations. A lot of our districts have moved to that online registration. So we talk about At the transition meeting, can somebody bring a computer and help the parent understand what's going to be expected? Do we have a one-page document that shows a list of the documents the parent's going to need to have? All of those pieces. And then the late referrals. You need to have that discussion of how are we going to handle late referrals? How are they notified? In our referral system, there's a separate folder for late referrals for each LEA, so they clearly know, hey, this one's late, you need to pay attention to that one. If summer birthdays, so probably about April-ish, we start looking ahead to all those summer birthdays and making sure that we're aware and we can do any early assessments that we can along the way. And then finally on section B, back to the flow chart, steps 12 and 13. Once you've finalized it, make sure you're clear on how long you all agree this is good for. What is your timeline for reviews? What is your timeline for your process for signatures? And I think I did allude to that earlier about us having to kind of even plan that before we got finalized. We had to start planning that kind of early. How did we communicate across our early Head Starts, our family empowerment centers, and other collaborative partners? And then, as I shared earlier, that training that's taking place, how are we all agreeing on the training and working together? And what we created a slideshow together that was used at all of the training. Back then, this was before COVID, so we did those all in person. So probably might be a little bit different now, but having those opportunities for our service providers from the LEAs and our service coordinators from Regional Center to have other times to communicate and connect is really important in developing those relationships. Okay, I think we are done. And then I think we saw a comment back to Julie's comment earlier. Yes, Lead K is another partner to think about in your Part C referrals. I was just explaining the Exceptional Family Resource Center because Lucia referenced EFRC, and I wanted to make sure folks knew who that was. But yes, Lead K does handle, we get referrals for those for our students who have failed their newborn hearing screenings. And then Nancy
There was
shares.
What? Yes, go ahead. That's what I was going to mention.
Nancy's comment, we found doing this at times yearly was a bit much, so we touch base yearly and update it as needed. Absolutely. We just had our meeting in December. Any concerns, any areas we don't agree, okay, and we document in our minutes that we've reviewed it and there are no concerns at this time. So we don't have to go through this whole process. Actually, we haven't gone through this process. What was it, 2018, 2019? But we just check in each year. So I don't see any other.
Heather, I had a little reflection just on, just Heather's, as Heather's talking about our experience in San Diego. We had to undergo a major revision because the agreement that we had in place had just been rubber stamped for, none of us knew how many years until we went back. And it was, I believe, the initial agreement was developed when legislation was first passed. And then everything was just kind of rubber sealed. And there was turnover at a time when many of us who were Part B had to move into this realm of working very closely with Part C and even being in charge of some LEA Part C services, where Regional Center had staff that had been there doing this for a long time. And it just wasn't working. We did need to request from what was the SEEDS project before. It was a little bit like CalECSE today. This was funded many years back to provide technical assistance. And so what I want to reflect on is that turnover is very important to pay attention to, but so was that collaboration piece in between. I think much of the pain that we underwent was because we did not really develop a collaborative and that decision-making process and all of those protocols that are part of page 2 of our flow chart. And so it was a process. I think it took us, with that 10-month signature, I think 3.5 or 4 years to really finish it, because we had to pause to go and, really work through all of the rough spots that we were having in our collaboration in making decisions, because we did not have those processes in place. And as Heather said, the agreement is now reviewed annually. That doesn't mean that it gets edited annually, but sometimes that annual review also includes just talking about the practices, and communication systems change, the referral pathways change depending on which electronic systems are in place and which forms we are using. And so even though the agreement itself does not need to be edited, sometimes just talking through any recent changes or upcoming changes and really being able to visit those in a productive manner is very, very helpful. So I just wanted to offer those, and I really don't see any other questions, but we have time, so I'm open to anybody just unmuting and having any comments just about resources.
Lucia, before we do that, I just do want to reiterate, it may come across like, we've done all these things and we've got it nailed and everything was rosy and wonderful. It was not at the beginning. It was a tough conversation of all of a sudden we would be at those collaborative meetings and we would have agreed on the IFSP forms. And we'd go to the next meeting and, well, we changed those. And so it was a lot of back and forth. So as Lucia alluded to, it was a lot of hard conversations of, wait a minute, what are our agreements? What are we doing? How can we collaborate? Versus, well, regional centers, the lead agency, therefore it's going to be this way, or LEAs are responsible for this, therefore it's going to be this way. So I think it really, we had to have some tough conversations. I think at one point, our Family Empowerment Center's representative on the panel, her eyes were about this big, just like, oh my gosh, these are some deep disagreements. But we've really worked hard and worked through these processes to come to a better collaboration and really open that communication. So I don't want you to think like just things, we snapped our fingers and things were like this.
And Heather, I just want to mention to everybody before we give it to, we open the mic and then Laura closes us out. I just want to remind everybody, this 4-page, if you don't want to figure out where to find this presentation, etc., you can always visit the CalECSE website and go to resources by exemplar, because there are several exemplars. Interagency collaborations is one exemplar. And the 4-page flowchart document is right there, is the very first resource. And all of the resources that we showed today are linked within that 4-page document. So again, that 4-page document, you can download it and you can use it right off of our website. Thank you. If there are any questions, or please just unmute.
Okay, thank you so much. It looks like we don't have any questions. Heather, do you mind reducing the slideshow a little bit? It's kind of zoomed in on and only a small portion is showing.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so, oh, now there's no slideshow.
Yeah, I have to unshare. And
Oh, okay, got it. Sorry. So my name is Laura Clark, and I am the program specialist with the California Early Childhood Special Education Network. And I'm so happy that you're here today. Those were a lot of great resources. Like they said, they're available on our website. We offer a lot of other trainings. We have our symposium coming up in October. We also are starting communities of practice. And this month we began our first, and it's pretty exciting. So regionally across the state of California, we're offering an opportunity for frontline practitioners and for leaders in the field to get together and talk and share best practices and really cross-pollinate those good ideas to help us do our best for our earliest learners. Again, I encourage you to look at our website. You can find our trainings, our workshops, everything there. It's CalECSE.org. I really want to thank our presenters today. They did an awesome job. That's a lot of work. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to get this all together. So a big thank you to Sarah Franco, Lucia Garay, and Heather DeFede. I really appreciate everything you've done to support our state and our early learning leaders and practitioners. So we do have a survey if you'd like to fill it out. You'll find it in the slideshow as well. Again, if you want to join a community of practice, if you want to see more information about our social media, we are on Facebook and Instagram. So we're all over the place. We're here to help you. We're here to serve you free of charge, except our symposium. But it's pretty reasonably priced, and we just want to be here to help you. So if you have any questions, we'll stay on for a few minutes. Otherwise, we just want to wish you a great day and a happy short week. Thanks, everybody.